Hello and welcome to our tutorial. So in this tutorial we're going to have a look at some basic sort of AI and working out a few sort of fundamentals of where are we? Here we are, of our character. What we're looking for is these guys here, so these turrets. So we're going to have a look at how to control them and control their rate of fire and how to set them up. So so let's take this turret here, and in fact let's delete that turret there, and we can duplicate it and work out how it's set up. So in the original, if I drag this in here, no, that's the character. The original FBX, if I put it in here, the turret is all part of the same file. So it's a separate they're all separate objects, but it's part of this file here. So you have to right click and you have to unpack the prefab in order to be able to move individual components outside of the original FBX. So I've done that, and I've moved the turret outside. So this is the turret top here. This is the mesh. So let me just duplicate that there, and we'll move that out here, and we'll delete that and explain that in a minute. And we'll just we'll call it turret 1. And what we'll do at turret 1 is we will take it and move it over on top of the other turret base there, so it's approximately in the right position. So if we want this to fire at our player, we have a couple of things to do. First of all, let's work on a script. So I have the script written here, but I'll just for the sake here, let's call this T1 for turret 1, and we'll open this up in Visual Studio. So what we'll do is let's have a look at what do we need to create in order to get the turret to fire and look at the player. And there's a few things that we need to do, but the first thing we need to do is work out distance. So let's get rid of void start. I think we're going to use that. We can get rid of that. So we'll start with declaring a variable. So we want a variable that is public, first of all, so we can see it in Unity. And it's going to be the player, so it's going to be a transform because the player is going to move. And then we want it to be, we want to give it a name, and we'll call it target. Now we want to figure out the distance between ourselves. This script's going to go on our new turret, so we need to actually make a variable for that. So we'll say this could probably be private, or it should be private, but we're going to make it public so we can see it in Unity, but normally you wouldn't need to do that. So public, it's going to be a number, it's going to be a distance, a decimal, so it's going to be a float, and we'll call it distance, or dist. Okay, so now we need to define what that is. So distance is, what does it equal? Well, it's going to be a vector 3, and then built into Unity is dot distance, so it has an understanding of what that is, the distance between 2 points, and then we need to tell it which 2 points. So we're going to go transform that position. The transform that position is the position of the object that this script resides on, and then the target dot position. So we've now worked out the distance between our character and the turret. So we can and we can do that with any 2 objects. Sorry, I'm pausing for tea. All right. So what do we do next? Well, we need to use that information. So we're going to say if the distance, we need to put that in a bracket. So if the distance is smaller than, and then smaller than a number that we haven't defined yet, so we'll call that number range, and it has tried to preempt me with a different thing, so we haven't defined what that is, which is why it's red. So let's put that in here. So again, it'll be public, and it'll be a float, and we'll call it range. It was going to be the range of our gun, our turret. And then what do we want to do? Well, we want the turret to look at the character. So we're going to go transform dot look at, and then stipulate the target. And the target in this place, or in this instance, is target. So let's just save that. We're going to go File and Save All. So this is T1. We'll jump back into Unity here, and we'll take this T1 script. We don't seem to have any compile errors, or nope, we don't. So we'll put this on our new turret. So here it is here, and we need to stipulate what the target is. So I'm going to just drag and drop that over here, and we have to give it a range. So we'll give it a range of, I don't know, 10. Now, normally you wouldn't see this distance here, it would be private, but we'll leave it here so we can, as we play, we can see ourselves sort of encroaching on. So the distance is now 17, 16, 15, and now, if you look at this, you can see the turret is actually looking at me, but it's looking at me in quite a bizarre way. It's pointed into the floor. So let's have a look at that. So the reason it's doing that is because of local and global orientation. So when this was made in Blender in the 3D app, its orientation is not pointing in the same way as global. So this look at function that we're using, or this command, it uses Y as up and Z positive on Z as forward. So this isn't going to work for our turret. Now there are fixes we can go through. We can change its orientation in code. We could go back to Blender and remodel it, or the simplest thing to do is just to create an empty. We'll call this empty T1 control, and we'll just make sure that it is in the correct position. We'll look at it from above, and so we'll place the empty there, and it's too high, so we'll put it there. Okay, and then we'll take our turret 1 and we'll make it a child of this. Now that means that this is we're going to remove that component, the script, and we'll put the script now on the empty, because the empty should have the correct orientation, and if it doesn't, we can always rotate it so that it does have the correct orientation. So now we will press play, and we'll jump through our level here nice and quickly, and we can okay, in our haste, or in my haste, I haven't set a range, so we can make it a range of, I know, 15. So let's press play, and off we go, and now we're in range. So you can see it's not firing or doing anything interesting, but it is looking at me. So that's the first step, is to get it to look at me. And so let's go back to our script here and see what we can do next. So what we could do now is we could put fire. So I could create a new function, say fire, and so when we were in range, it fired, but that won't work for us, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. So we're going to actually put in a new variable here, and we're going to call this so public float, and it's a new range, but it's going to be called fire range, and you'll see why in a minute. So then let's go down here, and we're going to say if distance is smaller than fire range, then we're going to fire. Nope, not fire range, just fire. And then down here, we're going to have to, where am I going? I am going here. I'm going to make a new function. So I'm going to say void fire. Okay, and then we'll define what firing is in a second. But this fire range here, well, let's say that this equals 10. And we'll say our range by default equals, I don't know, 12. It could be 10 as well, it doesn't matter. But these run separately. So if we're going to have a look at how this works in a second, but because we're going to have to add something in here about time. But if we want the turret to continuously look at the character and fire separately, otherwise what will happen is the turret will fire because we'll have a rate of fire, and then while it's not firing, it shan't look at the player. So we need to kind of put it in 2 increments. Hopefully that'll make more sense in a minute. So time. So let's set up time. So we need to have a fire rate. We need a rate of fire. So again, we'll have a public variable, and it's going to be a float as well, and we'll call it fire rate. And we'll say it's equal to, say, 2. So every 2 seconds it'll fire. So then down here, we're going to have to add in a sort of an added part of the if. So I'm going to go and. So if distance is smaller than range and time is larger than next fire, and we'll get to next fire in a minute, and fire rate. So that's our if for this. So we need to put in what is next fire. So I'm just going to declare it up here. So it's a float, so it's a number, and it's a next fire. We're actually not going to give it a value for now. So down here, we'll say what next fire is. So next fire is going to be equals time dot time. So let's see if we can make head or tail of this. So so we're going to say when I'm in range and enough time has passed, fire. So I'll fire, which we'll get to doing that in a minute. So we'll fire, and at the end of firing, we'll timestamp it. So let's say it's 10 seconds into the game and I fire. So I fired and I go, what's the time? It's 10 seconds. So then we want to fire 2 seconds later than that, which is 12 seconds. So this next fire will be set at 10. Fire rate is 2, so 10 plus 2 is 12. So when time is bigger than 12, fire. And then this now becomes 12. And the 12 plus 2 is 14, so when time is better than 14 or bigger than 14. So this is a little loop in time, a little kind of logic statement about time, which will allow us to declare a rate of fire. And we don't need to say the exact value for that because it'll constantly change as time goes by. Okay, so now we need to fire something. So in order to do that, we need to declare that we've got a bullet. So we're going to have public, and we're going to have a rigid body. And we'll call it bullet. Now, a rigid body is just something that has physics. In this instance, we need a prefab, so a prefabricated item that we can add in time and time again. So, and that's going to be called bullet. Now, so to add the bullet, all we need to do is we need to go. So instantiate bullet, and then tell it where. So we need to go, and then where is a good question. So we don't want to instantiate it in the middle of the turret. So we're going to make an empty, and it'll be a transform, and it's going to sit in front of our gun, and that's where we're going to add our bullet, and we'll call that fire point. Okay. So where are we going to add this bullet? Let's add it in at fire point. Dot position and fire point dot rotation. And then we need to say it's an as a rigid body. As a rigid body. So now I'm getting an error on that, but we'll have a look at why in a moment. But so before I do that, I need to make another variable, and I'm going to call it, we could call it, bullet clone. Okay. And then we're going to define that this is the bullet clone. So we're going to say bullet clone equals this. Okay, and then we'll just move this down. So let's see what that means, or how does that make sense? So if we just add, we're going to add a force in a second. So if we add a force to this bullet, we'll be adding, so it'll be a specific object, and what we want is lots of them, not just one, because we're going to fire every 2 seconds and the bullets will probably remain in the game. So what we need to do is create a clone of the bullet. So we're going to say this bullet here, so add this prefab in, we'll call it this, and then add a force to whatever this is. And then when I add the second one of these in, it won't be called bullet, it'll be called, bullet clone.0001, or it'll be assigned, the prefab that's instantiated, that's added to the game, will be assigned a specific name beyond this name here. And that way we don't have to worry about it adding the force after 2 seconds has passed to the original bullet. Okay, so this is so all we need to do now is add the force. So this is it here. So in this version of it, it's called a clone, and we're going to use add force. So we're going to say our clone, add force to it, forward, and this is the only variable we haven't declared yet. So let's do that. So we're going to go bullet clone. So bullet clone dot add force, and then we have to tell it in what direction to add the force. So it's going to be our fire point dot forward, and dot forward in Unity is positively on the z-axis, and we're going to multiply that by a speed, and we haven't made that speed yet, so let's do that. So up here we'll have one more, so we're going to go public float speed equals, I don't know, let's say 2000. And then that's it. So we have worked out the distance between the character and the turret, and then we'll said if I'm within a range, then look at the character, and if I'm within the fire range and time is set up correctly, then fire. And after I've fired, I can fire again in 2 seconds if I'm still in range. And when I'm firing, I'm going to add in a bullet, and that bullet's going to be added in at this position with that rotation and be given that sort of force. So let's save that. There we go. And let's go back into Unity. Now if we've typed anything incorrectly or made a compile error, it'll pop up here. You can see we haven't, but it's added all this extra functionality to our script. These are all our variables. So it's saying we're add in a bullet. Now I have a bullet here, but let's just make one so you can see a bullet being made. So it's going to go add 3D object sphere, and you can see here it's enormous. So I'm going to make it say 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. And then I'm going to add a material to it so it glows. So there we go. So you can see it's glowing. And we'll call it, I don't know, B1, bullet 1. And we want this to have physics. So it already has a collider. So what I want to add to it is physics and a rigid body. And I should probably send this to continuous. We'll worry about the rest another day. So, so here we are. We've got our bullet with our sphere and our rigid body, and it's ready to go. So how do I make a prefab out of it? Well, I just drag and drop it over here, and now it's a prefab. And I can delete it in here. I don't need it here anymore. I'm just going to put it in my prefabs folder so I know where it is. I go back to my turret control here, and it's saying where is the bullet. So I'll put B1 in there. Now it's saying firing point. It needs a firing point, so we haven't done that. So let's again add an empty, and we'll add this empty in front of our our muzzle, or the front point of the gun. And then we'll call this I don't know, F point or something. But it needs to be the child of the turret, because it needs to turn with it. So when this turns, this will now turn with it. So it's saying, where do I fire from? We'll fire from that point there. And let's extend the range. Let's give it a range of 20. And oh, it's a fire range of 20, and we'll give it a range of 22. So it'll look at me for 2 seconds, or for 2 meters of movement before it'll actually fire. So let's press play. And I can see just in the script there, I can see I'm 27, 24, 23, 21. So I'm within range now, and you can see that it's firing at me. It's firing every 2 seconds. So it's looking at me, and it'll fire. There we go. And so in our next class, we're going to look at UI, and we're going to look at health, and how we might turn this highly intelligent UI system that we've got here into something a little more game-like. Okay, so that's it for now, and like I said, next stage is adding in things like health and score.